Welcome back to another episode of the Chris Rod Mac Show, where every week we talk about the latest trends in AI. We discuss the second and third order consequences of that, and also engage in interesting discussions with founders, startups within the space. Welcome back, Rod and Max. How are you guys today?
Hi everyone, great to be here. Hi Max, hi Chris.
I'm good. Good to be back.
Perfect. Today we have really interesting topics. We're going to talk about a little bit from a macro perspective what the hype cycle of GenAI or AI in general is. We're going to talk about the cost and benefit analysis of, companies and how they actually employ or exploit AI for their own business workflows. And then last but not least, we're also going to talk about security. We had a Copilot recall. We see that OpenAI and Apple are going to collaborate. I think Elon Musk was very, very vocal about it. So really interesting thing. Let's dive into it already. Cool. Let's start with the first one. Gartner's Hype Cycle is obviously something that maybe our audience know about, but it's basically a curve that shows how new technology actually gets known, gets famous, and then also how it develops over time. And it really starts from this one exponential phase of innovation trigger, accelerating really quickly. Then there's this peak of inflated expectations where it's not really clear how this new technology will actually play a role in the bigger society. Then it actually goes down where it's a true of disillusionment in terms of expectations. And then slowly but surely, it actually rises to a plateau where the technology is either getting adopted by society, by businesses, or not. And so when we look at this Gartner hype cycle and we think about it for generative AI and AI in general, obviously over the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion in expectation and excitement and hype when it came to AI. And really, my question to you guys, and let's discuss that, is where do we sit today on this curve? And what do you guys expect will happen with GenAI as we go along? Maybe, Rod, I start with you.
When I see the Gartner hype cycle curve, I always think that I'm not sure in the end how it comes into place because, so according to them, right now we'll be at the peak of the hype, whereas I believe that it's just getting started, especially as we see that most companies are starting to roll out things. Most companies are just moving out from a pilot phase. And actually, many of them have not even started to do pilots. So as a result, to think that this is at the peak and let's say in 2 years, things will slow down, I am quite skeptical about it. Quite the opposite. I do think that this is just getting started.
Interesting. What about you, Max? How do you think about it?
I think I concur with what Rod was saying, and because I think there's a slight difference with what the media is portraying versus what's actually happening on the ground. At least based on the conversations that I've had, based on the use cases that we have seen across multiple industry, we've seen people are trying it, but almost always at a smaller scale. And the rollout of it is not there yet, hasn't gotten to a point where I would say, it's available for the entire organization or it's available for my entire customer base. But what I do see though is that, people are really trying to push this the forefront of everything that they do. So from board meetings all the way down to, your monthly, weekly development meetings, we're seeing this being, touted, being part of their roadmap discussion, etc. So I'm actually, would think that the hype cycle probably when it comes to rollout is just starting, because when the rubber hits the road is when we know whether or not the economics actually work. For example, that's at least how I think about it, because we can always shoot for things and start something.
Yeah, so both of you are of the opinion that things are just starting and accelerating, and actually thinking about that the expectations are deflating is not something we see. And I think this is also something we see in the market, right? I mean, NVIDIA is now a $3 trillion worth company. We see VC funding actually going into the space. Mistral just raised a 600 million round at a 6 billion valuation. And if we look at this hype cycle that Gartner has shared, I think what we see is that only slowly some of these use cases are maybe getting into this true of disillusionment. For example, Gen AI enabled virtual assistants, for example, are, we must ask whether or not those are really helpful if, users and people and customers are really still, if they're interested in talking to an AI, or rather actually still speak to a human being. But I would agree with you guys. I think for narrow use cases, like, I don't know, playing chess or very specific use cases, we do see perhaps a certain, I don't want to say maturity, but definitely already a progression. Whilst there are a lot of use cases, a lot of technologies within the Gen AI industry and sector that is still yet to come. And I think after the announcement of ChatGPT 4.0, that's something that still needs to be rolled out worldwide. I think multimodal is still not really defined how this actually will play around a role in our lives. And when I say multimodal, is obviously, how do we combine images, Excel, or tables and text and video and all these different formats together. I mean, I can still not make my presentation in one click of a button.
That's indeed the case. So not only is something where we're just seeing these first use cases, but also what is it being done with them? So in that, at the moment, is still rather limited. Chatbots to become a reality, we're still very far from that.
That is true. And I think if we were to follow this hype cycle, I think one of the rationale for the way they have drawn it and saying, okay, we're maybe hitting this plateau is the question of, will AI models actually get more data? And I think that is really the limiting factor next to data centers and energy and chips. What do you guys think about that?
Well, just a few days ago, I was reading an article about when will we run out of data to use for this type of models, because we have to think that right now we are using pretty much all data that's available on the public internet. Some say we can use synthetic data, meaning we can say, let's ask some GPT, some LLM to generate new concepts, to generate new corpus of text that we can use if we don't have any more fresh data. These models, so this technology also degrades. On one side, we don't have any more human available data, but also on the other hand, we have also exhausted the use of synthetic data.
I find that fascinating. Never thought one day we will run out of data. And then what's in my mind, I'm thinking, how do humans train ourselves? And then I realized we have thousands and thousands of years of all this data that is coded into our DNA, in which we do something. I think the question around data, then I guess the second order consequences then becomes, will we actually get to, an AGI because we are running out of data? Number one. Number two, do we actually need to train narrow use cases LLMs with all the data in the world? Or are we just better off selecting a subset of data? Where are they going to get all the data? How are you going to differentiate one model from another when, there's a finite amount of data to train yourself? Just a thought.
Definitely. And I think, again, coming back to the hype cycle, I think that's one of the drivers for saying, okay, are we actually hitting this plateau now? Because obviously, yes, we've seen this excitement around ChatGPT, like GPT 3.0. Like that's really when it started to feel like magic, isn't it? Right. And then now, of course, the models become a bit smarter, but is there going to be this big breakthrough of very general intelligence, I think is the question. And I think this actually gets into another discussion we will have in a little bit, which is around private data, right? And I think just recently Instagram or Meta, in fact, actually said that they're going to crawl the data. They will use the images to train their LLM. And obviously that actually had a big cry out in the community. And a lot of artists said, okay, I'm going to switch to another platform because of that. And these are now the pools of data that obviously are not public, but private. And I guess from a macro perspective, it would be also interesting to see how industries are going to use their proprietary data to create, smaller or narrow use cases, as you said, Max. And in fact, I remember that China is actually going such a route where the government is very supportive of different industries developing their own specific AI. I mean, we had a conversation around closed and open systems, and we also talked about China being quite closed. But on another hand, I think from a hype cycle perspective, there's this interesting cost benefit analysis around, okay, well, the entire industry spent 50 billion on chips from NVIDIA to train AI, but then they only got 3 billion in revenue. So is this a good return on investment? And I think this in general is a question, right? It's so expensive, not only for the LLM companies, but also for companies or corporates in general. So maybe let's shift to the second topic, which is around, is it now really helpful? Does it save costs? And I think, Rod, you had a really interesting article sent on Klarna. Maybe you want to elaborate on that one.
Yes. So Klarna, we already know it from as one of the leading companies that has been getting real results from working with generative AI technology. So we can remember that at the beginning of the year, they released that they had this chatbot for customer support that in fact was able to replace up to 700 employees. And just this month, they released another update of what is it that they've been doing in the space of generative AI. And this time is about automating everything related to marketing. So we have to think, for example, so for a international company, when they run campaigns, all that is entailed. There needs to be translators, there needs to be copywriters, there needs to be agencies involved. Of course, we need to have all type of photo shootings, studios, etc. So there's a lot of logistics involved. It is not cheap at all. And they were describing that, in fact, what happened now is that they're using not only GPT models to generate the text for these campaigns, to not use copywriters, but also they're using models to generate images like Midjourney, DALL-E, and similar, to instead of having photo studios, photograph sessions, and so on, they're using just generated images. And they claim that now with this, they are having savings of up to 10 million on an annualized basis. And this is significant because I do think that on one side, not only is about these company savings, but it's just again, how the number of people that are involved in creating these campaigns, all of a sudden, they will not be longer required. And likely this will encourage many more to move from having real photographs and instead having just generated images from DALL-E or other models.
That is true. So really coming down to cost reduction, I think also it's really great to see a company actually publishing some numbers, because I think that actually can help to increase the confidence in people's investments into the space and getting a bit of concrete ideas of what the business case really looked like. So I think just sharing a couple of numbers here. So Klarna says that AI is responsible for 37% of the cost savings, which translates into the 10 million on an annualized basis, as Rods mentioned earlier. But then also, I think the key here really, and this is really the gist that I took away from that, was that it's not only a cost reduction, but it's also a productivity gain. So actually through AI, it's not like, okay, well, we're going to replace these 3 people that are doing some campaigns. No, AI also helps to actually be more effective, more productive, and actually create more campaigns. Max, from maybe let's say a financial perspective, what do you think about that?
I think overall, if you look at the world from financial services perspective, it has always been about uplifting of productivity. Right. I guess the question that I have in my mind is how much of those productivity will move from, for example, marketing onto other parts of the business. Can you use an AI to, improve the ability to underwrite credit? My general sense is it will probably move through the entire operations of a company. Even I think that will basically free up people's time to come up with other types of innovation for whatever needs that we're serving. I think that's super interesting. What I do think will be quite interesting is the consumption, the demand on the other end, right? Because we only get to like half of the world's population, or slightly more than half the world's population online. They're not on all services yet, but I think there are more and more opportunity, especially with the uplift of productivity, helping people to get to, I guess, different levels of doing things.
Yeah, but Max, do you think that this is sort of like a macro zero-sum game, because only if Klarna adds another 10,000 campaigns because they can use AI to be quicker on that? I don't think that that's going to lead to a question on, do people need more marketing or can they consume more marketing? But essentially, my interpretation of that is actually that Klarna is just going to be better than its competitors, right? Because you can definitely increase your traffic and your active users or getting more customers, but in fact, by running more marketing campaigns. And if you can do this more cost effective, which is essentially the case here, reducing the cost of acquisition, then that's actually going to be good for them versus the competitors.
I'm just thinking more from an individual's perspective. So let's say I'm an individual, I have about 24 hours a day, right? How many ads am I consuming, which helps me to get to a certain type of problem that I want to solve as soon as possible, which allows me to, access certain type of services. So I'm just thinking like, if we were to come down to, I guess, in my mind, what I think of first principles as a consumer, what are other things that we're not getting yet? And I think I'm also not a very good representative of the world, right? Because I think I'm very lucky in a developed world. But then if you go to developing world, there's still a lot of gaps when it comes to services in which we can provide to them, in which then, you actually improve the outreach, number one, and also improve the amount of services that we get to deliver to the rest of the world. So I think overall, the productivity gain is actually a very good thing.
I can scratch what you're saying, Max, so where I'm thinking how many companies, startups, and so on do not have access to the resources and the talent to run these glossy, very polished campaigns that large companies can do. And now, by using, similar like Klarna, generated images and also text from GPT, DALL-E, and other models, they are on the same level as something that is very professional. But now today, instead of going to a glossy magazine, the brands are working with influencers, meaning now we as society accept, let's say, like a lower quality of content. We want something that's more, let's say, like natural, less polished. And this is something similar with this image generated, that compared to, of course, a professional photo studio, a production setup, this is a step down. But with this, more and more companies, individuals who have access to this resource, they will be able to increase the quality of their productions.
Definitely. And I think this really is a really good example how companies can utilize AI in a meaningful way and in a way where it not only saves costs, but also increases productivity, which is essentially within the marketing department, creating campaigns, creating images, text, etc. So let's maybe shift to another use case. And I think, again, coming back to the hype cycle chart that Gartner created, one of the use cases that seemed to go into this true of disillusionment is chatbots. And I guess if we were to look into the customer support use case, we also have some numbers here, which comes from IKEA. And I think they have implemented an AI assistant to help with obviously their big product portfolio. And it seems that only 1,500 users are active per month. How would you evaluate that, Rod?
I would say here one can take, let's say, like the positive view or the negative one, depending on how one wants to see. On one side, if we are more pessimistic, we can say they have just a few thousand users using this chatbot. But if we look at something such as SimilarWeb, which gives us data of how many visitors a website gets every month, they have around 190 million. And this can be that maybe we don't know, so to whom this chatbot is shown. Maybe you have to be registered, maybe it's for some very limited use cases, and as a result, it's just a subset. But nevertheless, this is a very small fraction of the total user base or a number of visitors that IKEA gets every month. But then we can look at it from the positive side and think IKEA is making headlines and with a cutting-edge technology. And this is something where it's a bit odd. So when have we really thought that IKEA is a technology company? We don't really associate IKEA as a technology company. And we see that they're able to have these very advanced use cases that until just a couple of years ago were only reserved for the Googles and the Metas and the Microsoft of this world, that are able to deploy these and apparently get results, because the conversion rate that they're seeing, which is 5%, is really a very good one for the industry.
Definitely. Max, what are your take on that?
The AI chatbot stuff, actually within financial services, we've seen some of that before, albeit not GenAI. But we're also seeing more of the GenAI chatbot coming up now. I think overall, we are going to see more and more uplift in my opinion, in this space. The ability to talk to someone outside of office hours, the ability to maintain the overall customer experience, even when, let's say, you and I are IKEA workers, are off work after 5, I think is quite powerful. In which a little bit like the internet, you can have that ongoing conversation with someone in order to get the support. You don't really need to hire 24/7 support from around the globe, which is primarily a lot of the model that we use today for a lot of the larger financial services. I think that uplift of, I would say, customer experience will be quite interesting. And I think it will touch all sorts of businesses, right? It's not just technology companies that will benefit from that. At least that's my overall take. Whether or not it's going down a fruit of disillusionment, I don't think so, simply because we're really just scratching the surface on this. And just imagine the amount of times where you have to talk to someone and then you realize that, oh no, it's closed, I have to call tomorrow. I think that should just go away. Someone could help us to solve some of the problems that we want to.
And maybe one of you guys can actually help explain to the audience what's the difference between like a normal AI chatbot versus a Gen AI chatbot.
It boils down to so if it is scripted or not. So like chatbots have been around for maybe like a few decades already, but historically it was that to create one of those chatbots, you need to have an idea of what will be the conversation flow that will be happening, and then create like a decision tree of what happens if you get the response or that response and so on. So as a result, you'll have a very narrow world of possibilities available. You will need to also restrict the input for example, so just allow there is a button that says yes or no. And this means that it will be very complicated to have, so like all the subset of possibilities that this can go through. And it will in the end feel very robotic. Whereas now with generative AI, we have pure natural conversation. You can just type what you want. And even if what you're typing is not exactly what it was meant for, or it doesn't fit the script, it is a little bit vague, maybe you saw synonyms, maybe your grammar is off and so on, it will still recognize it and give you the information that you require.
So essentially what you're saying is that it's basically like chatting with ChatGPT, which I guess like a lot of our listeners have actually tried, and you can have mistakes in it. You're not hitting the keywords that the program has been trained on, and still you get a decent answer. I think the only thing that comes to my mind is that hopefully this generative AI chatbot doesn't hallucinate and comes up with an answer, because I think that's also something we've seen in the aviation industry, where I think there was this one case where the airline company needed to pay a customer because the AI said that he or she was actually entitled to some reimbursement.
Yes, so definitely the topic of hallucinations is a constant battle that companies have in order to get good results, not only for customer-facing products, such as this case with IKEA and a customer support chatbot, but also for internal tools. The whole topic of what is so-called enterprise search these days is the number one use case in the enterprise for using generative AI. And the core boils down to how can we get relevant results that are also faithful and real based on like the source of documents.
Definitely. And I think, the hype cycle and the disillusionment, I think part of this is definitely coming from maybe our own stigma when we think about chatbots, right? I mean, how often have we tried to use a chatbot from a bank or an insurance company, and it was never a great experience. I'm sure chatbots also just have a very bad stigma in the overall society these days, just because it hasn't really worked well in the past. And I think it would just take time for this to pass and to be convinced that, okay, well, now you're talking to like a ChatGPT and it'll be more efficient than the previous models that we've seen.
Absolutely. We are definitely a little bit biased by now, because I would say around 2016, 2017, there was a big wave of chatbot technologies, and especially Meta was very so optimistic about it. They were trying to push it everywhere. But in the end, the results were so optimal. I remember also there were some startups that were claiming that you would be able to have your own personal assistant. So, for example, to order things, book flights, order food, and so on and so forth. But in reality, it was always a human behind. They were never able to achieve a situation where this would be fully automated, there will be an actual algorithm, but instead it was always a human behind the screen.
Yeah, I think we've seen something similar. A few companies that I know, let's say, for example, there's a company, I can't remember the name now, but out in India, they were trying to do something like that, which is a chatbot to help rural Indians to access the internet. The internet is, very dominantly in English, but as you probably know, rural India probably do not know English really well. So they were trying to use chatbot in the local languages to help them to access internet as well as to access internet services. Think of paying bills, think of, booking flights, or I don't know, buying some groceries. I think in the end, because the language flow is a lot more divergent than we think, there is not really a good way on outlining all the different flow of conversations. It makes it really hard to actually do what they want to do. Even when you say, I want to buy flight tickets, the amount of question that comes up from that could be, what's the weather like? If I were to buy from this to this, is the weather better from this time to that time? Yada, yada. So I think with the advent of GenAI, it makes it a lot more natural. Also allows you to have that divergent conversation to get to where you want to get to. I guess the objective is probably the same, but the route to get there is probably different.
So the takeaway on cost and benefit and, coming back to from a corporate perspective, should you invest into AI? And yes, and if so, then in what? I think really we see some case studies now in the world, and it seems like for marketing purposes, AI may be having a real impact now. I think when it comes to chatbots, there's a bit of that stigma that needs to go away, but it seems like, at least now around here, we believe that this is not going to be a true where it disappears, but actually it can only improve from here. Great. I think the last topic we wanted to talk about is a recent, let's say, update by Microsoft on Copilot and their PCs. And basically, Copilot is now learning from the behaviors of your laptop. That's probably the best how I would summarize it. And it can take screenshots, which obviously led to quite a cry out in terms of security when it comes to that. And also just recently, Apple and the rumored Apple OpenAI deal has now been finalized and also been published, whereby Apple will implement ChatGPT and other OpenAI features on their phones. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's also a topic of communication, of helping users understand when their data is sent to an external server. In the case specifically of Apple, what's happening is a hybrid approach. Some models, so pretty much what is going on is, you remember Siri, right? So like Siri, now we're talking about the age of all chatbots. Well, we also have like the age of personal assistants that is, I think by now also like 10 years old. Siri back then was touted as this very smart assistant, but over the years it came out that in the end it's not so powerful. Now they're trying to make a revival for Siri, this time powered by generative AI. Some of it will be done by OpenAI, especially the more complex queries, but ideally, those daily use cases will be done on device, meaning the data will never leave the device, it will never require an internet connection, and it will be kept private. Apple is promising that even for those use cases where it requires to access a server from OpenAI, first, it will always ask you. It will say, this requires to access an external service. Do you agree? So you will need to click yes. And second, the data they send, it will have the IP address obfuscated such that OpenAI or any other provider cannot build profiles based on your prompting behavior. Will that be enough to assuage users that this is safe and nothing will happen to their data and it will not be misused and so on? I'm not sure, but nevertheless here what we're seeing is how it is important to explain users what's going on, but also how also the devices themselves are becoming so powerful that they don't require to use OpenAI. So for example, I was just this week at an event done by Intel. So we really talk these days about Intel with generative AI. And nevertheless, they're releasing many new products. The so-called AI PC that are coming out, many new chipsets that compete with NVIDIA GPUs. And they were showing how it's possible to run many AI workflows on device, on commercial laptops for consumers that give a similar result than what we're seeing from NVIDIA, but using, for example, less power. So they will use half the power that an NVIDIA GPU would require. So over the years, and maybe not over the years, over the next months, we'll be seeing how this new hardware is coming out and how Microsoft Apple and so on, they're trying to build the software for that and run all these use cases on device. But nevertheless, the news you were sharing on concerns about screenshots being made on passwords by these copilots from Microsoft and so on, I think that will continue persisting because it also comes down to how this software is designed, and often software is buggy or is not well conceived and so on. So it will be about communicating and explaining users.
And so do you guys, or do you, Rod, think that Elon Musk is exaggerating, saying that, oh, if they really go through with that, I'm not going to let any employee in my company have an iPhone?
Well, he loves always a good controversy. He will never shy away from so trying to create some buzz behind. So first, because this is what drives X, his platform, but also we should remember that also he has XAI. So anything that makes others look less good, and then he can say, with XAI, we do it differently, will be good for him. So I mean, I'm sure he's a bit exaggerating. I don't think that he has he will actually do it.
What's your opinion, Max?
Interesting. Maybe we should bet on it just for the fun of it. Will he do it or not? This is a good question. I think there are enough devices out there that you can survive without Apple within the working environment. I think that's doable. So feasibility wise, yes. Whether or not he would want to do it, I think that really comes down to, how serious is he about pushing his AI business. If this is not just about, what he wants the media to know, but also about really building AI from a privacy standpoint, from a business standpoint, I think he might actually do it. So I guess I can't really know his motive around saying that. But if I do, then I can tell you a little bit better. But I sense that, he probably will do it because it's just him. Because it's just Elon. He does whatever he wants.
So you mean he would actually ban all the iPhones from his employees and make them use?
So yeah, he might do it. I actually think he might do it. And also that also undercuts Apple, right? Quite significantly. And there is also something playing at the back because ultimately XAI, the goal is to compete with OpenAI. Does the OpenAI deal with Apple basically give OpenAI the exclusivity, which means XAI or Grok don't really have an opportunity to compete there. There's also a slight, I guess, competitor thinking around that space. So I don't. That's why I don't really know what's the motive. If the motive is to protect the privacy of the business and therefore they could build better AI compared to OpenAI, then I think he will do it. But if the motive is just to just to scare Apple away from working with OpenAI on an exclusivity, then then he might not do it. So I really don't know. But it's quite interesting to think about that.
None of us know it, but also he dropped the lawsuit against OpenAI, so we will never know. But Max, maybe your opinion on this whole security cry out with some of the GenAI elements in hardware devices, consumer hardware devices.
I think we have went through the privacy problem before, right? In the sense that everyone said that you are if you're not being sold a product, you are the product. Right, that was the famous writing around that, saying that we are the product of Facebook, in which Facebook sell our data to the advertisers, and in which then they sell as products. I think the privacy question, to me, from a consumer perspective, has always been about what's the trade-off. I think I'm okay giving up a little bit of privacy, but then it's actually uplifting my entire, productivity, help me to get to a better phase of my life, if you will. So when it comes to consumer product, I think of it from two ways. One, from a consumer perspective, am I getting more value with giving up a little bit of the privacy in order to use the service, right? Majority of the time, yes, right? Because we've been doing this, let's say, with Google, for example, with the location services. So that's one. Number two, I think thinking from an Apple's perspective, by installing all these new AI features, by giving up a little bit of the privacy concern, because that you have to train the AI models, right? So therefore, some of the data will eventually go out. Will that actually sell more of your devices? If it does, then you can justify that it's actually okay, because you're overall increasing the productivity level of a consumer, therefore also increasing the overall economic outcome of the business, and therefore it's fine. So I think it's a little bit of a trade-off. And if all of us are so concerned about security, it's actually hard to even walk out of the street, right? Because like even in London, the moment you walk out of a tube, you will see like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cameras on your face. You have no idea what are they doing with those data. And we can kid ourselves and say that, China has been doing that for ages, but to be honest, the Western world has been doing that. It's for our own security, right? To a certain extent. So it's really about the trade-off.
Yeah, I think you have a point here. It's also about the unawareness of people or the awareness of people. But great, guys. I think we covered quite a few topics today, starting with the hype cycle. And I guess our bottom line is that we don't really see that we may actually hit a plateau. I think Gartner sees the plateau actually driven by the data consumption and the question on return on investment for the entire industry. And I think that's how they actually came up with hitting that plateau. I think we also covered cost and benefit analysis for different companies. And I think that just here is really, it depends on the use case. And we see that for marketing campaigns and marketing related activities, AI can actually very much support not only on cost savings, but also becoming more productive. Other ones like chatbots, etc., have a bit of a steeper hill to climb just simply because they also have to educate the market. And then last but not least, we spoke about hardware devices, consumer hardware devices, phones, PCs that are now equipped with the ability of GenAI. And I think our takeaway here is that this is also just another version of Siri or other assistants in the past. But then again, we also face the, normal conversation, I would say, around data and privacy that we also have in other parts of our life. Well, thank you guys for all your opinion and all your contribution here. If you, the audience, liked our show, please subscribe, please like it on X, on LinkedIn, on the different podcast platforms you use, and see you next week.